The morning he couldn't open the jar was the morning it started. Not the jar specifically. The jar was just a jar, marinara, the kind with the stubborn vacuum seal that nobody can open without running it under hot water first. He'd been opening jars his whole life. He'd opened this brand of jar 100 times. He stood at his kitchen counter at 7:15 on a Tuesday in October and tried to open the jar and couldn't. And then tried again and couldn't. And then stood there with the jar in both hands and felt something move through him that he couldn't name right away. He ran it under the hot water. He opened it. He made his breakfast and ate it and went to work and didn't think about the jar again. He didn't think about it because thinking about it would have required thinking about what was underneath it. The 3 weeks of not sleeping well. The project at work that had been running 6 months past its deadline and that sat on him like a second gravity. The accumulated small failures of maintenance that happen when a person is running on the reserves of their reserves and keeps telling themselves they're fine. He was fine. He was always fine. He'd been fine for 47 years with considerable consistency, and he saw no reason that this particular Tuesday should be different from all the Tuesdays before it. The jar opened. The coffee was made. He was fine. He was not fine. If this kind of story, not a dramatic breakdown, just a man and a jar and what comes after, lands somewhere for you, subscribe. We look at real human situations here, the ones that cost something to finally see. His name was Nathan Cole, and he was 47, and he had been, in the specific arithmetic of his life, self-sufficient since he was approximately 14. He'd grown up in Columbus, in a house that had required him to be self-sufficient, which was not a complaint. He'd arrived at this understanding in his late 30s, the non-complaint version of it, after some years of carrying the resentment version. His mother had worked 2 jobs for most of his childhood, the kind of 2-job working that left almost no margin for the ordinary parenting things, and his father had been present in the literal sense and absent in the relevant sense, the way some fathers are. And Nathan had learned early that if something needed doing, it needed to be done by Nathan. He'd done the dishes. He'd made sure there was food. He'd gone to parent-teacher conferences with a note from his mother explaining her absence and had sat across from teachers who looked at him with the specific expression of adults looking at a kid who is managing more than he should and who don't say anything about it because they don't know what to say. He'd learned to read that expression and to meet it with the neutral competence that said, "I'm handling it. There's nothing to discuss." He'd been meeting that expression, or variations of it, for 33 years. He'd grown into a person who helped people. That was the thing you'd notice if you knew him. He was the one who showed up when things needed doing, who knew the right number to call, who offered before you asked. He helped his friends move apartments. He called his widowed neighbor Mrs. Patterson when her furnace made the wrong sound, because she'd mentioned it once in passing and he'd retained it, and had a guy who could look at it. He was reliable and capable, and the person in any room who quietly took on the logistics of the situation. He did not let people help him. The distinction was not lost on him. He'd examined it, the way you examine things when you're honest with yourself, which he was, up to a point. He knew the distinction existed. He'd decided it was a character trait rather than a problem. He was good at giving and not good at receiving, and that was just who he was, and it wasn't hurting anyone. He was currently hurting himself with it, but he hadn't gotten there yet. He worked in project management for a construction firm in Columbus, commercial work, mid-scale, the kind of jobs that required keeping 40 variables in motion simultaneously and being the person who knew where each variable was at any given moment. He was excellent at it. He'd been doing it for 16 years and had the specific competence of someone who has done something long enough that the difficulty has become invisible, which is both a skill and a trap. The current project was a renovation of an office complex, which had been complicated from the start by a client who changed specifications mid-project with the casual confidence of someone who didn't understand that changing specifications mid-project was like changing the direction of a moving ship. Each change required resequencing, recosting, recommunicating with subcontractors who had already scheduled their own teams around the original plan. Nathan had managed it. He'd managed it the way he managed everything. Methodically, without complaint, absorbing the additional weight without redistributing it. He had a project coordinator named Anna, who was good and was supposed to share the load. He didn't share the load. He told himself he was protecting her from the client chaos, which was partly true and was also a thing he'd told himself in every professional situation for 16 years as a reason not to let anyone else carry any of the weight. His boss, David, had said to him twice in the past month, "You need to delegate more." Both times Nathan had said, "I've got it." Both times, David had looked at him with the expression Nathan recognized from the teacher conferences. The expression of an adult looking at someone who is managing more than he should. Nathan had met it with the neutral competence. He'd got it. He had it. He was not getting it. His girlfriend's name was Claire. They'd been together for 2 years, which was longer than his previous 2 relationships combined. A fact that said something about how he'd approached relationships in his 30s and that he'd rather not examine in too much detail. Claire was 39, taught high school history, had the organized intelligence of someone who has spent 15 years managing 30 teenagers at a time and has learned to distinguish between the problems worth solving and the ones that resolve themselves. She'd been watching Nathan for 2 years with the patience of a person who understands that some things can't be rushed, and who has decided anyway that the thing is worth waiting for. She'd been watching the past 3 weeks with a more specific patience. The patience of someone watching a person run at a pace that isn't sustainable, and knowing that saying so is unlikely to help. She'd tried 3 times. The first time, a week into the project's worst phase, she'd said, "Is there anything I can do to help?" She'd said it carefully, knowing the topography of the question. He'd said, "I'm fine. It's a tough stretch, but I've handled worse." She'd nodded and not pushed. The second time was a Saturday when he'd come home at 8:30 after being at the office since 7, and she'd made dinner and it was on the stove, and she'd said, "Sit down, I've got it." He'd said, "I'll help." She'd said, "I've got it, Nathan." He'd helped anyway. He'd come into the kitchen and taken over a part of the dinner that didn't need taking over, and she'd watched him do it with the expression of someone cataloging information. The third time was a Sunday when she'd said, very directly, "You look exhausted. You've looked exhausted for 3 weeks. I'm worried about you." He'd said, "I appreciate that. I'm okay." She'd said, "That's not... I'm telling you how I see you. That's not a thing that needs to be refuted." He'd looked at her. "I hear you," he said. "I'm managing." She looked at him for a moment in the specific way she had, the way that meant she was deciding whether to press or to wait. She'd waited. She had a lot of practice at this particular waiting. The thing that went wrong happened on a Wednesday. The client had called David, going over Nathan's head, which was itself a statement, to say that the materials for the lobby renovation, which were on order, were taking too long, and that they needed to be sourced from a different supplier, and that this decision had been made, and could it please be implemented. Nathan got the email from David at 9:15. He read it and understood immediately what it meant. 2 weeks of work with the current supplier, contracts already signed, a change that would require renegotiation, a delay that would push the timeline in ways that cascaded forward through all the remaining schedule dependencies. He should have called Anna. He should have said, "I need you to handle the supplier communication while I work on the schedule revision." That was the correct move. He knew it was the correct move. He sat at his desk at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning and knew with full clarity that the correct move was to pick up the phone and divide the work. He did not pick up the phone. He spent 4 hours doing both things himself. He called the current supplier and navigated the renegotiation, which was uncomfortable because the supplier had made scheduling commitments based on Nathan's order and was not happy. and the unhappiness required managing. He revised the schedule. He communicated the changes to the subcontractors. He drafted the email to the client that explained the implications of their decision in language that was professional and unmistakably clear about where the problem originated. At 1:15, he sent the email to the client, and then sat back and felt the specific hollowness of having done too much for too long, and arrived at the end of it with nothing left. His phone showed 3 texts from Claire, sent across the morning, each one checking in. He hadn't seen them while he was working. He read them now. The first, "Hope the morning is manageable. Thinking of you." The second, 2 hours later, "If you need to cancel tonight, I understand. No pressure." The third, from 20 minutes ago, "Just making sure you're okay." He sat at his desk and read the 3 texts. He thought about typing back. He had several responses available. "Fine. Managed it. See you tonight. The project had a situation, but it's handled." All of these were true, and none of them were what she was asking. He typed, "I'm okay. See you tonight." He put his phone down. He sat at his desk and looked at the schedule revision on his screen and thought about the supplier call and the subcontractor emails and the 4 hours and Anna's desk on the other side of the wall and the phone he hadn't picked up. He thought about why he hadn't picked up the phone. He'd been here before. Not this specific desk, not this specific project, but this specific choice. The choice between accepting that something was too much and accepting help. And the other choice, the one he always made, the one where he compressed himself further and took on more and handled it and ended up exactly here. Done. Functional. Alone with the weight of it. He'd been making that choice for 33 years. He was very tired. He'd told Claire, in the first months of their relationship, the outline of the growing up. Not the whole thing. He wasn't a person who gave the whole thing easily, but the shape of it. The 2-job mother, the absent present father, the kid who'd learned to manage. She'd listened and had said, "Did you ever ask for help when you were young?" He'd thought about this. "Once," he said, "in 7th grade. There was a thing with my dad. He'd said he'd come to a thing at school and he didn't come. And afterward I told my friend Marcus and I said I didn't know what to do and I don't remember exactly what I said I needed. Some kind of help figuring it out." "What happened?" "Marcus told the other kids," he said. "Not to be cruel. He was just a 7th grader. He didn't know any better. By lunch, there were 4 kids who thought it was interesting that Nathan Cole's dad was a deadbeat." He said it without particular emotion. "I was 12. Claire had looked at him. "I stopped asking after that," he said. "Not because I was traumatized. I just understood that it wasn't useful. If you needed something, you figured it out yourself." She'd been quiet for a moment. "That's not asking because it wasn't useful," she said carefully. "What is it then?" "It's not asking because it was unsafe," she said, "which are different things. One of those you can update when the environment changes. The other one stays in the body longer." He'd thought about that. He'd thought, she's right. He'd thought, knowing she's right doesn't change the body. He'd thought, I'm fine. He'd said, you're probably right. And they'd moved on. The dinner was at his apartment. He'd been supposed to cook. He'd said he'd cook. He was a good cook, had been for years. It was one of the things he did with a thoroughness he applied to most things. He'd said he'd make the lamb thing, the one with the preserved lemon that he'd been doing since his 30s, and that Claire had told him twice she thought about when she was hungry. He got home at 6:15 and stood in his kitchen and looked at the refrigerator. He'd bought the ingredients on Sunday. They were there. The lamb was there. The preserved lemons were there. What was not there was whatever it took to start. The specific resource that cooking required that was different from the other resources. Not just physical energy, but the quality of attention that cooking well required. The kind that couldn't be faked or pushed through. The kind that was simply gone when it was gone.
It was gone.
He looked at the refrigerator. He thought, I can do this. He thought, it will take 45 minutes of active cooking plus the marinating time, so I need to start in the next 10 minutes if we're eating at a normal hour. He thought, I said I'd cook. He started. He got the lamb out of the refrigerator and started the marinade and was 20 minutes into it when he made the mistake. A small thing, not catastrophic, just the wrong proportion of something. The kind of error that compounds if you don't catch it. He caught it and tried to correct it and realized the correction was going to change the dish in a way he didn't want. He stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the bowl. He could do the lamb imperfectly. He could acknowledge what had happened and adjust and make something that would be fine, but not the dish he'd said he'd make. He could do that. He looked at the bowl. He threw the marinade out. He started again, this time more carefully, with the specific focus of a man who cannot afford another error, and therefore cannot actually cook without the fear of error. Which was the problem now. He was cooking defensively, and defensive cooking didn't produce the lamb with preserved lemon he'd promised. He was 40 minutes into the second attempt when Claire arrived. She came in with her key. She had a key, 2 months, the first key he'd ever given anyone. And she said hi from the entryway, and he said hi from the kitchen, without looking up because he was concentrating on the timing of something. She came to the kitchen doorway. She looked at the counter. The discarded first marinade hadn't made it cleanly to the trash, and there was evidence of it on the counter. The second marinade was in progress. He was moving with the tight efficiency of someone who is managing a situation rather than cooking a meal. Nathan, she said. Almost there, he said. What happened? I had to start over. First one didn't. That's not what I'm asking, she said. He looked up. She was leaning in the doorway with her coat still on, looking at him with the expression that was not the teacher expression and not the catalog expression, but the third expression, the one he'd only started to be able to read in the past few months, which was the expression of a person who was about to be very honest because she'd decided it was necessary. Let me help, she said. I've got it, he said. Nathan. I'm fine, he said. I just had to restart. It's... Let me help, she said again. Claire, he said it with the edge in his voice that he heard as reasonable and she heard as the edge. She looked at him for a long moment. She took her coat off and hung it by the door. She came into the kitchen and stood beside him and looked at the counter. What needs doing? She said. I said I've got it, he said. I heard you, she said. So I'm still here, she said. What needs doing? He stood at the counter. The lamb was in front of him. The preserved lemons were on the board. There were 3 more steps before the dish was assembled and into the oven, and each step required the kind of focused attention he currently did not have. And she was standing beside him asking what needed doing. He stood there. He thought about 7th grade and Marcus and the lunch where 4 kids found it interesting. He thought about the word unsafe that Claire had used months ago at his kitchen table. He thought about the jar on Tuesday morning and the 4 hours on Wednesday and the 3 texts he'd answered with, I'm okay. He thought about how tired he was. He stood at his kitchen counter at 6:50 on a Wednesday evening with the lamb and the preserved lemons and his girlfriend standing beside him asking what needed doing, and he felt something he couldn't remember feeling in 33 years. He felt like he could just say it. Not a big thing, not a confession, just the simple, direct 8-word sentence that was available to him. He said, I don't know if I can finish this. He said it to the counter. He couldn't quite look at her. Claire was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Her voice was the normal version of it. Not soft-pedaling, not compensating, just normal. The way you'd say okay to any unremarkable piece of information. Tell me what's done and what's left, and I'll do the rest. He told her. She did the rest. They ate at 8. It was the dish. Not his version, not exactly. She'd made a judgment call on the seasoning that was different from his, slightly bolder, and he'd noticed it and found he didn't mind. It was the dish, made in his kitchen, mostly by her, in the 40 minutes after he'd admitted he couldn't finish it. He sat across from her and ate it, and felt something that was complicated. Not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was in it. Not relief, though relief was in it. Something more specific. The specific feeling of a thing you've been bracing against for a long time that turned out not to require bracing. The door you've been pushing against that opened when you stopped pushing and pulled. She'd said okay. She'd asked what was left, and she'd done it, and she hadn't made it a moment. She hadn't said anything that made it heavier than it was. She'd just cooked the lamb while he sat on the couch for 40 minutes and stared at the wall, and then she'd said the food's ready, and they'd eaten. She said over the meal, "Can I ask you something?" He said yes. "Was it bad, saying it?" He thought about this. "No," he said. "That's the strange part." "What were you expecting?" He thought about Marcus. He thought about the lunch. He thought about what unsafe meant in the body, in the 33-year body of a person who had learned at 12 that asking created exposure, and exposure created shame. "I was expecting something to cost me," he said. "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly," he said. "Some version of being less, being seen as unable to manage." She looked at him. "Do you think you're less?" she said. "No," he said. "Rationally, no." "Not rationally." He ate a piece of the lamb. "Less rational," he said. "Some part of me thinks I should have been able to finish the dish." "You got through the worst 3 weeks of a project while sleeping 4 hours a night," she said. "You couldn't finish the lamb. Those are related." "I know," he said. "And I still feel like I should have been able to." She looked at him. "That's the part I can't reach," she said. "The should." "I know," he said. They ate in the comfortable quiet that had developed between them over 2 years, the specific quiet of two people who had learned that silence was not a problem to be solved. He ate and thought about the should, and where it had come from, and how long he'd been carrying it. He thought about what she'd said months ago. Not traumatized. Unsafe. The thing that stays in the body longer. He thought, the body is still in 7th grade. He thought, that's a long time to stay somewhere. His neighbor's name was Earl. Earl was 71, had lived in the building for 22 years, had retired from 30 years as a machinist at a plant in Columbus that had closed in 2018. He was a compact, methodical man, with the specific quality of people who have spent decades working with precision. Everything he did was done the right way, without shortcut. Not from perfectionism, but from the understanding that the right way and the sustainable way were usually the same thing. Nathan had been running into Earl in the building's common areas for 4 years, and they'd built, in the way of neighbors who respect each other, a friendship that was primarily practical and occasionally more. Earl knew Nathan's car. Nathan knew Earl's routine. When there was a building issue, they handled it together without requiring a meeting. He ran into Earl on a Thursday morning, the day after the lamb. The elevator was out. Maintenance, they'd been notified, a few hours, and Nathan was carrying a box from his car to his apartment, taking the stairs, and Earl was coming down as Nathan was going up. Earl looked at the box. He looked at Nathan. "I'll take the other end," he said. "I've got it," Nathan said. Earl looked at him. "It's 4 flights of stairs," Earl said. "I know where I live," Nathan said. He meant it as a joke, and it came out as something with an edge. Earl looked at him for a moment, not offended, just looking. He stepped aside and let Nathan pass. Nathan carried the box up 4 flights of stairs. He got to his floor and set the box down outside his apartment door and stood there breathing. He stood there for a while. He thought about Earl's face on the stairs. Not hurt. Earl didn't do hurt easily. He was too settled in himself for that. Just looking. The look of someone who had seen a thing and noted it. He thought about what the thing was that Earl had seen. He knocked on Earl's door an hour later. Earl opened it and looked at him. "I wanted to apologize," Nathan said. "On the stairs. That was a rude thing to say." Earl looked at him. "It was," he said. "I'm sorry." Earl nodded once, the way he accepted things, directly, without theater. "Come in," he said. "Coffee's on." They sat at Earl's kitchen table. Earl's apartment had the quality of a place that had been arranged by someone who had thought carefully about what they needed from a space and had arranged for exactly that. Nothing excess, nothing missing. The spare clarity of a man who had been living alone for 5 years since his wife had passed and who had not tried to fill her absence with objects. The coffee was good. Earl made it in a percolator, like Ruth Petrov from an earlier story, though neither knew the other. Just 2 older people in 2 different apartments who had decided the percolator was correct and saw no reason to change. They talked about the building for a few minutes, the elevator repair, a thing with the parking garage that was ongoing. Nathan drank his coffee and let the talk settle. Earl said eventually, "Hard stretch?" Nathan looked at his cup. "Long project," he said, coming to the end of it. "You looked rough yesterday," Earl said. "Before the stairs. You looked rough for a while, actually." "I've been managing it." Earl turned his cup in his hands. He had the patience of someone who was not going to be deflected by a phrase like managing it. "Can I say something?" he said. "Sure," Nathan said. "I did what you did," Earl said. 40 years of it. You couldn't give me help with a damn thing. My wife could tell you." He said it without sentiment, as a fact, reported accurately. "She used to say she felt lonely in the same room as me because I kept everything so handled there was nothing left for her to do." "No way in." Nathan looked at him. "We figured it out, eventually," Earl said. "Took too long and required her to be patient in ways she shouldn't have had to be." He paused. "But the thing I understand now that I didn't understand for 40 years, he stopped. He was arranging the sentence. "I thought the independence was the strength. I thought if I needed something, it meant I was less. But all that time, I was keeping people out. I wasn't strong. I was just unavailable." Nathan was quiet. "Unavailable," he said. "There's a version of strength that's actually just closed," Earl said. "It looks the same from the outside. The person who handles everything, who never needs anything. But from inside the relationship, from the person who wants to be close to you, it looks different. It looks like a wall." He picked up his coffee. "My wife told me once that it was hard to love someone who never let you do anything for them, because love needs somewhere to go." Nathan looked at the table. He thought about Claire standing in the kitchen doorway asking what needed doing. He thought about the box on the stairs and Earl's face. He thought about the 3 texts, just making sure you're okay and I'm okay. He thought about love needing somewhere to go. "My wife." He stopped. "Claire?" Earl said. "We're not. Yeah." He looked at his cup. "She keeps trying to help. I know what you keep," Earl said. A pause. "She stood in the kitchen last night," Nathan said. "I couldn't finish cooking. I finally said it. I finally said I couldn't do it. And she just..." He stopped. "She just did the rest. She said okay and did the rest." Earl looked at him. "What did that feel like?" he said. Nathan thought about the word he'd reached for last night. "Like a door opened when I stopped pushing against it," he said. Earl nodded. "That's all it is," he said. "That's all it ever is." He drank his coffee. "The pushing is the problem, not the door." Nathan sat at Earl's kitchen table with the percolator coffee and the morning light and the specific quality of being in a room where someone was being honest with him and he was being honest back, and nothing bad was happening. That was the part that was still surprising. Nothing bad was happening. He'd expected for 33 years that something bad would happen when he let the wall down. That the exposure would produce shame the way it had in 7th grade with Marcus and the 4 kids at lunch. That showing where he was vulnerable would give someone the coordinates for a wound. Nothing bad was happening. Just coffee in a neighbor's kitchen on a Thursday morning. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been unavailable because you thought that was the same as being strong? Sometimes just naming it is the whole thing. We'll be here. He called Anna that afternoon. She answered on the second ring. He said, "I've been under-delegating on this project." He said it cleanly, without preamble, because the preamble was for someone who needed to manage how the information landed, and he was trying to stop doing that. "I've been absorbing most of the client chaos instead of distributing it. That's not good management, and it's not fair to you." Anna was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. He thought, of course she knows. "I want to change how we're working for the last phase," he said. "I'd like you to take point on the client communication going forward. I'll be available for escalation, but I don't want to be the default first contact." "I can do that," she said. "The client is difficult," he said. "I want to be honest about that." "I've been watching you manage them for 6 months," she said. "I have some ideas." He thought about that. 6 months of watching. He'd been managing, and she'd been observing and forming ideas that he hadn't asked for because he'd been managing. "Tell me the ideas," he said. She told him. They were good. One of them was better than what he'd been doing. "The third one, use that." She said, "Okay." He said, "I'm sorry it took this long." She said, "It didn't hurt me. It just, you could have had more support." He sat with that. "Yeah," he said. "I know that now." He told Claire about the conversation with Earl. Not on Thursday. Thursday he'd been processing it, in the way he processed things that required processing, which was internally and without expressing that the processing was happening. He told her on Saturday evening, sitting on his couch after dinner, with the ease of a weekend that had been different. He'd called her Friday morning, just a call, which was not something he did. He'd said, "I was thinking about you, and I didn't want that to be something I just thought, so I'm calling." She'd been quiet for a second, and then said, "I'm really glad you called." They'd talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, and it had been one of the better 20 minutes he'd had in months. He told her about Earl on Saturday because it felt like something she should know. Not because he was required to share it, he was clear with himself about that. Because he wanted her to know it. Because the wanting was new, and he was practicing acting on it. He told her the outline, the stairs, the apology, the coffee, what Earl had said. He told her the part about love needing somewhere to go. She was quiet when he finished. "That's a good neighbor," she said. "He's a very good neighbor," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Can I say something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I've been watching you for 2 years," she said. I knew there was something, some wall, some place you didn't let people in. I decided to wait because I thought pushing would just make you push back." She paused. "But I want you to know that it was hard sometimes. Not painful, just," she searched for the word, "tiring, being outside the wall." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I don't want to be outside the wall," she said. "I want to be." She gestured at the apartment, at the couch, at the space between them. "In here." He understood what she meant. "I know," he said again. I'm trying to figure out how to let that happen." He paused. "It's harder than I thought it would be. Even when I want it, the habit is—" "I know," she said. "But I want it," he said. I want you in here. She looked at him. He'd said it to her face, which was different from understanding it in his head. Different in the specific way of something that requires a thing of you, not a grand gesture, not a declaration that came with trumpets, just a sentence said to someone's face that was real and unmanaged and exposed. Nothing bad happened. She moved closer on the couch. She didn't say anything. She just moved closer. He let her be close. That was the whole thing. She moved closer, and he let her be close, and nothing bad happened, and the wall was still partly there. He knew it was still partly there. Knew it would be there for a while. Knew that 33 years of construction didn't get renovated in a Thursday coffee conversation. But there was a door in it now. A door that opened when you pulled instead of pushed. He thought about what Earl had said. Not strong. Unavailable. He thought about the difference. Strong was a thing you were, regardless of circumstances. Unavailable was a choice you kept making in the name of strength. They could look the same from the outside. They didn't feel the same from the inside. He'd been calling one the other for a very long time. The project ended 3 weeks later. Not with a dramatic resolution, with a final inspection, a punch list, a series of sign-offs that turned a thing that had been in progress into a thing that was finished. He was at the site for the final walkthrough, and Anna was with him, and she handled 2 of the client conversations without him, handled them well, handled them better than he might have handled them, because she hadn't been running on 3 weeks of depleted reserves. He stood in the lobby of the finished building and looked at it. He'd been part of making this. The lobby with the materials they'd sourced twice. The timeline they'd rebuilt from scratch in October. The 1,000 small decisions that had gone into the 120-day renovation. It was done. He took a picture and sent it to Claire. She sent back, "Beautiful. You did that." He thought about that sentence for a moment. You did that. He typed back, "We did. Me and the team." She replied, "I stand corrected." He smiled at his phone in the finished lobby. He'd never sent her a picture from a job site before. He'd kept work and everything else in separate containers, the way he kept most things, the way of a person who had learned that the containers were load-bearing. He'd sent this one because he'd thought of her when it was done, and had, this time, acted on the thinking. He was practicing the acting on it. He drove home. He knocked on Earl's door on a Friday evening, just to say thank you. He'd been meaning to and had been putting it off in the specific way of someone who finds gratitude harder to give than help, which was its own irony and which he'd noted. Earl opened the door. Nathan said, "I wanted to say thank you for the conversation on Thursday." Earl looked at him. "You're welcome," he said. Nathan stopped. He was going to say it helped, which was true but was the surface version. He tried for the less surface version. "It's been a long time since someone said something to me that actually got through. I think I needed to hear it from someone who'd done the same thing, not someone who was trying to reach me." Earl nodded. "How's Claire?" he said. "Good," Nathan said. "Better. He thought about the couch, the door in the wall, the moving closer. "We're better." "Good," Earl said. "How are you?" Nathan said. "Actually." Earl looked at him. Something shifted slightly in his face, the recognition of the question being real. "Getting by," he said. "Some days better than others." "The anniversary's this month," Nathan said. He knew because he'd seen it on the building's shared calendar, where Earl had put it 2 years ago, the way people put things they want witnessed. November 14th. Earl looked at him. "You remembered that," he said. "I remembered it," Nathan said. A pause. "Yeah," Earl said. "The anniversary's this month." "Do you want to have dinner?" Nathan said. "I'll cook the lamb thing." Earl looked at him. "With the preserved lemons," he said. Nathan looked at him. "You can smell it from the hallway," Earl said. "It's a good smell." Nathan almost laughed. with the preserved lemons, he said. Earl considered this. Saturday, he said, if that works. Saturday works, Nathan said. He walked back to his apartment. He stood in his kitchen and looked at the counter where he'd thrown out the first marinade 3 weeks ago, where Claire had finished the dish, where the lamb with preserved lemons had eventually been made and eaten. He thought about Earl at the dinner table, about the anniversary on the 14th, about a man who had learned, at the cost of 40 years and the patience of a woman who loved him, that unavailable was not the same as strong. He thought about the body being in 7th grade. He thought about how long it takes to leave a room you've been in that long. He was leaving it. Not all at once. Not without the habit pulling back, not without the reflex, the I've got it, the managing. Those were still there. They'd probably be there for a while. You didn't renovate 33 years of construction in 3 weeks. But there was a door now. He'd found the door. He thought about what Earl had said. Love needs somewhere to go. He'd spent 47 years being somewhere love couldn't reach, and he'd called it independence. And it had looked like strength. And it had been a very long, very practiced, very specific form of alone. He was trying something else. He went to the refrigerator. He checked if he had lamb. He did. He thought about what Earl would eat, whether he had any dietary things Nathan should know, and realized he didn't know, and that this was the kind of thing he could simply ask. He picked up his phone. He texted Earl. Anything you don't eat? Earl replied 2 minutes later. Not a fan of cilantro. Nathan typed, noted. He put his phone down. He started the marinade. This time, he didn't restart. 6 months later, he was better at it. Not fixed. That wasn't the right word, and he knew it. Better. The habit was still there. The instinct was still there. The I've got it was still the first sentence that formed when someone offered something, but he'd gotten better at noticing when it formed, at pausing before he said it, at asking himself the question he'd started asking after the Thursday with Earl. Is this strength, or is this unavailable? It was a useful question. It didn't always give a clear answer, but it created a pause in the automatic response, and the pause was where the choice lived. He'd asked Anna for help 3 times on the next project. Real asks, not assigning tasks in the normal course of management, but saying, I'm stuck on this. What do you see? She'd had useful things to see. He'd thanked her. She'd said, you're welcome without making it a moment, which he appreciated. He'd called his mother more. This one had surprised him. He'd called her more in the spring than he usually did, and they'd talked in a different register than usual. Not the catching up calls that covered the surface, but actual conversations, where he'd said how he was doing and meant the answer. She'd said once, you seem lighter. You sound lighter. He'd thought about what to make of that and decided to just let it be information. He'd let Claire in. Gradually, specifically, more and more. He'd showed her the parts of his work that were hard. He'd told her about the 7th grade thing, the full version, not the outline. He'd said once, on a Sunday morning, that he was having a bad day, and he didn't have a particular reason, and he didn't need to be fixed. He just wanted her to know. She'd said, okay, I'm here. And she'd been there, and he'd been there, and it had been simple, just that. He'd sat with her in the kitchen while she cooked. That was a thing that had not happened before. He'd always taken a task, always been useful, always been the person occupying some function. He'd sat in the kitchen and watched her cook and talked to her while she did it, without contributing anything logistical to the situation. He'd felt the discomfort of it and stayed anyway. He'd been a person in a room with no specific purpose except to be in the room, and nothing bad had happened. He'd gotten better at letting nothing bad happen. He had dinner with Earl every few weeks. Not every week, and they were both private people. They both valued their quiet. There was nothing forced in it. But every few weeks Nathan made something, or Earl made something, and they ate at one or the other's kitchen table and talked with the ease of 2 people who had, without planning it, found in each other the specific thing, someone who understood what the wall looked like from the inside. Earl talked about his wife sometime, not the grief of it, or not only that, but her specifically, who she'd been, the things he'd known about her that he was glad he'd known. He talked about her in the present tense sometimes, the way people do when the person is so fully inside them that the past tense doesn't fully account for it. Nathan listened. He'd gotten better at listening without managing, at being in a conversation without running the simultaneous track of what would be useful to say next. It was something he'd had to practice, sitting in someone else's experience without immediately building a scaffold around it. He sat in Earl's kitchen on the Thursday evenings and ate whatever was being eaten and listened to Earl talk about Margaret, his wife, the woman who had been patient with him for 40 years, and he thought about patience and what it asked of the person doing it. He thought about Claire. He thought about the 2 years she'd spent outside the wall, finding ways to knock gently without demanding entrance, and about the patience that required, and about what she'd said, tiring, being outside the wall. He thought about how long she'd been willing to be tired on the chance that he'd eventually find the door. He told her, one evening in the spring, that he thought about this. They were at his apartment and it was late, and the kind of late evening quiet had settled that was its own specific comfort, the quiet of two people who had been in enough spaces together that the space between them was comfortable rather than managed. He said, "I've been thinking about how long you waited." She looked at him. "For the wall to come down," he said. "Or for the door. I've been thinking about how patient you were, and I'm not sure I ever acknowledged what that cost." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't experience it as waiting," she said. "What did you experience it as?" She thought about this. "Choosing," she said. "I was choosing to be here. Every time you said I've got it when you clearly didn't, I was making a choice about whether to stay or go. And I kept choosing to stay because..." She paused. "Because I could see who you were underneath the I've got it, and that person was worth choosing." He looked at her. "That's a lot to have seen," he said. "You weren't hiding it very well," she said. The slight smile. "The I've got it is actually kind of transparent once you know what you're looking for." He thought about Earl's word, unavailable. He thought about what it meant that the unavailability had been transparent, that Claire had been seeing through it the whole time, that the wall had been, in a way, less solid than he'd believed. "Why didn't you say anything?" he said. "I did," she said. 3 times. He thought about the 3 times. "You said it like you were trying to reach me," he said. "I was trying to reach you, but He stopped. "I wasn't ready to be reached. When you came toward it, I just pushed back." He looked at the table. "You waited for me to find it myself." "Yes," she said. "That's..." He looked for the word. "Generous." "It was also self-interested," she said. "I wanted you, so I waited." He looked at her. He thought about what Earl had said. Love needs somewhere to go. He thought about Claire. For 2 years, sending love somewhere that had been mostly closed. He thought about what it must have looked like from her side. The wall, the deflection, the I've got it, and what she'd been deciding every time when she'd chosen to stay. She'd been choosing him. Specifically, consistently, with full information about what she was choosing. He hadn't been choosing her back the same way. Not for those 2 years. He'd been present and reliable and functional and genuinely caring. But he'd been caring at her rather than with her. The way you care at people when you haven't let them in. He said, "I'm sorry it took me so long." She looked at him. "You're here now," she said. "I know," he said, "but you deserved more of me earlier." She sat with that, Yes, she said. I did. She said it simply, without softening it, which was the thing about her that he'd needed all along. She wouldn't let him off the hook. She just wasn't mean about it. But I have more of you now, so I'm okay with how we got here. He looked at her. How do you do that? He said.
Do what? Hold both things, he said.
The yes, it cost me, and the it's okay we're here. She looked at the table. I think, she considered, I think when you love someone, you hold a long view of them. You're not just with who they are at this moment, you're with the whole person, the person they're becoming. She looked up, and I could see where you were going. Even when you were behind the wall,
I could see the direction.
He thought about that. He thought about Earl being in the same wall for 40 years, and Margaret seeing through it and waiting, and the door eventually being found. He thought about the direction. He was going somewhere. He'd been going somewhere for the past 6 months, since the jar and the lamb and the stairs and the Thursday coffee. He'd been going somewhere, and Claire had been right that it was a direction. And the direction was toward the thing he'd been refusing for 33 years, which was not help exactly, not even closeness exactly. Trust. That was the word he'd been avoiding. Asking for help required trusting that the help wouldn't be weaponized. Letting people in required trusting that what they saw when they were in wouldn't be used against you. Being close required trusting that the proximity didn't create vulnerability that someone could exploit. He'd stopped trusting at 12, 7th grade. Marcus and the 4 kids at lunch. He was 47 now. He was learning to trust again. It was harder than anything else he'd done. Harder than the 6-month project. Harder than the 4 hours on the Wednesday when he'd done everything himself. Harder than the lamb. He was doing it anyway. He called Marcus. He hadn't spoken to him in years. They'd drifted, the way childhood friends drift when they go different places, different lives, the contact reducing to a like on a social media post once or twice a year. He found his number in his phone and called on a Tuesday evening. Marcus answered. Nathan? Hey, Nathan said. I know it's been a while. Yeah, Marcus said. The surprise in his voice was real but not cold, just surprised. It has. I wanted to... Nathan stopped. He'd thought about what he was going to say and hadn't fully landed on it. I've been thinking about 7th grade, he said. The thing with your dad, when I told you. A pause. I was 12, Marcus said. He didn't sound defensive. He sounded like someone who had thought about this. I didn't know what I was doing. I know, Nathan said. I know that. I'm not calling to relitigate it. I'm calling because I spent 30 years not asking anyone for anything because of that day. And I've been... He stopped. I've been thinking about where things started, and that's where it started. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. I was a kid, but I'm sorry. I know, Nathan said. I know you didn't mean it the way it landed. Did it? Marcus stopped. Did it cost you? The 30 years of not asking. Nathan thought about Earl, about Claire, about the wall and the door, and what unavailable looked like from the inside and from the outside. Yeah, he said. It cost me some things. I'm really sorry, Marcus said. You didn't know, Nathan said. I'm not calling to assign blame. I'm calling because... He thought about why he was calling. He'd been sitting with the why for a week. Because I think it's one of those things that I carried for a long time without telling you I was carrying it. And that stopped feeling like the right thing. Marcus was quiet. I appreciate you calling, he said. Sure, Nathan said. They talked for 40 minutes, about their lives, where they'd ended up, the wide gulf of all the years that had happened after 7th grade. Marcus had 2 kids, was in the same city, was doing work Nathan found interesting. He was the same person Nathan remembered, grown up, with the specific quality of someone who had also been figuring things out across the years. Before they hung up, Marcus said, "Let me know if you want to get a drink sometime. It'd be good to actually catch up." Nathan said, "Yeah, that would be good." He meant it. He put the phone down and sat in his apartment in the Tuesday evening quiet and thought about 33 years of a door he'd closed at 12 and had been carrying the weight of ever since. He hadn't forgiven Marcus for something that hadn't required forgiveness. Marcus had been 12. It wasn't a wound. It was just a thing that had happened at the wrong moment and had set something in place that hadn't needed to be set. He'd called because the carrying of it was its own wall, and he was working on walls. He was working on walls. He made Earl the lamb again in November. It was the 14th. He'd texted in the morning just, "I remember. Come over at 7 if you want." Earl had come at 7. They'd eaten at Nathan's kitchen table, the two of them, with the lamb and the preserved lemons and the wine Nathan had picked because Earl had once said he liked Burgundy, and Nathan had retained this information the way he retained things he cared about. Earl had looked at the wine. "You remembered," he said. "I retained it," Nathan said. Earl made the sound that was his version of a laugh. They'd talked about Margaret. Nathan had asked real questions, and Earl had given real answers. The long kind. The kind that required a person to actually sit inside the memory. Nathan had listened without constructing a useful response or managing the texture of the conversation. He'd just been there. Earl had said at the end of the evening, "Margaret would have liked you." Nathan looked at him. "She'd have liked that you're figuring it out," Earl said. "She had patience for the people who were figuring it out." He paused. Less patience for the people who were sure they already had. Nathan thought about the "I've got it." He thought about how sure he'd been. "I was very sure," he said. "I know," Earl said. "You seemed sure." "I'm less sure now." "Good," Earl said. He left at 9, and Nathan did the dishes and thought about the evening and about Earl going back to his apartment alone on the 14th. He thought about whether he should have asked Earl to stay longer and whether Earl would have wanted that, and decided that Earl had stayed as long as he'd wanted to, which was the right amount, and that respecting that was also a form of care. He put the dishes away. He looked at the kitchen, the counter where the failed marinade had been, the clean counter now. He thought about the jar in October, the Tuesday morning, the hot water, the opening. He thought about how much had happened since a jar of marinara. He called Claire. "Hey," she said, "how was dinner with Earl?" "Good," he said. "It was the 14th. "I know," she said. "I thought about you." "I thought about you too," he said, "while I was cooking." A pause on her end. He knew why. He'd been saying things like this more, and the saying was still new enough that she registered them, the way you register a door that keeps opening when it used to stay closed. "I'm glad you called," she said. "I called because I wanted to," he said. "Not because something needed handling. Just, I wanted to hear your voice." He heard her exhale, not dramatically, just the specific exhale of someone receiving something they've been patient for. "Tell me about dinner," she said. He told her. He was still talking when midnight came. He kept talking. There was nothing to manage, nothing to handle, nothing to be strong about. He was just talking to someone he loved, on the phone, in the ordinary dark of a Tuesday November night, with his kitchen clean, and his neighbor down the hall, and 33 years of a door that was, gradually, reliably, learning to open. If this story landed somewhere for you, if you recognized the wall or the unavailability or the way the "I've got it" became a habit before you knew it was a habit, leave a word in the comments. You don't have to explain it. Sometimes just saying it somewhere is the beginning. We'll be here.